Good afternoon, everyone. This is Elizabeth Levingood from the APTA staff. Thank you for joining the APTA EMS Working Group webinar. We'll get started in a couple minutes, but I do want to let everyone know that I will be unmuting all participants because we want this to be as discussion-based as possible and for you to pipe up and ask questions and make comments throughout the entire webinar. So please mute your phone or your computer so that there's no extra sounds in the background. And we ask that you don't put yourself on hold because then we can hear your music. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone. If you could just please mute yourselves, either on your phone or your computer. Thank you. And we'll get started in a couple minutes.
Can you hear me?
Hi there. Yes.
Okay, that's Kerin. That's Kerin.
For those of you that are just joining us, welcome to the APTA EMS Working Group webinar. We are going to get started in a few minutes. I do want to ask you to please self-mute either your phone or your computer. I'm going to open all the phone or all the audio lines because we want this webinar to be as discussion-based as possible. We encourage you to ask questions and make comments throughout the entire webinar. So I'm going through and trying to unmute everyone, but I'm hearing some sounds in the back. So please remember just to mute yourself. And if you're having any trouble with your audio, you're welcome to submit through the question box. Okay, it's about 2:04, so I'm going to turn it over to Kerin Lester to get us started. And I hate to be a broken record, but please just remember to mute yourselves if you're not talking right now. And if you're having trouble with your audio, feel free to send a question through the question box. And
all
with
right,
that,
hi everybody. Welcome back. We've missed you. Hope you've missed the webinars. So today we're very much looking forward to bringing you some information about types of certifications. So it should be a very interesting topic for everyone, especially those that are just now going down the road of some type of certification or getting your EMS programs, really together and very structured. So we're very happy to have a great guest speaker today with some comments from Amy, who is also the Vice Chair of the Sustainability Committee. So can we see the next slide, please, Elizabeth? Okay, so we are going to be talking about pursuing certification. And first, here's the agenda. It's pretty much what Elizabeth had sent out previously. But first of all, let's hear from Elizabeth and see what she's got, what she and APTA have up their sleeves for us.
Great, thank you, Kerin. I just have a couple announcements for the EMS working group. And for those of you who aren't a member of the EMS working group, membership is open to any APTA member. And just follow up with me separately, and I can add you formally to the group. You do not have to have an EMS program at your agency to be part of the group. You can be considering one, or have a very advanced EMS program. Secondly, just looking at the year ahead for 2020, the EMS group is tentatively looking to meet in person in addition to these virtual meetings at the APTA Mobility Conference, which is in San Antonio, Texas, from May 17th to 20th this year, as well as the Sustainability and Multimodal Planning Workshop, which is July 26th to 29th in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania this year. So just tentatively hold those dates if you are able to travel and meet in person. Next, I just want to talk about APTA Connect. I hope everyone knows that the EMS working group has its own APTA Connect online community, and it's a really great tool to connect with other practitioners in the industry. We have a shared library where you can upload resources. This is also where I upload events and communicate with members. So strongly encourage you to engage in the online community. And if you're having any trouble logging in, please do not hesitate to reach out. And then before anyone asks, we are recording this webinar, and the recording as well as the presentation slides will be available on our APTA Connect online community next week. And we'll also post to the APTA website in case anyone's not an EMS working group member. And lastly, the presentation slides are actually already available on the webinar in the handout section. And that's it for me, I believe, Kerin.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And yeah. So our guest speaker today is Dan Locke, and Dan is the compliance administrator, or the environmental compliance administrator for Utah. And my first interaction with Dan was in the infancy of my EMS program, and at that point in time, Dan really, I was able just to pick up the phone and call him and ask him some questions. He is a wealth of information as far as environmental audits, everything to do with EMS, all different kinds of certifications. I believe yesterday when we were talking, Dan mentioned that he's been at this for 14 years. I've been at it I'm going on 4 years, and it seems like a lifetime, so I can't imagine what it seems like to him. But I am very happy that he has volunteered to talk to us about the different types of audits and compliance certification that we can actually get. A lot of this stuff was actually a little new to me because I didn't realize that we have options. It's all really about becoming better stewards of our environment where we work. So with that being said, let me go ahead and welcome Dan Locke to the mic, so to speak, and let him take it away. And by the way, after each, before he moves to a slide, he may prompt you for questions. If you have questions about what he just spoke about, please feel free to ask him.
Thank you for that introduction, Karen, and also thank you, Elizabeth and APTA, for hosting the webinar. If you can go to the next. Well, first of all, we really want to talk about just audits in general, purposes of audits. And these are both your internal audits as well as your certification or surveillance, depending where you are, if you are certified in your audit process. And what are some of the real key areas here of why we do the audits, why they even exist. Like I said, as you can see before you, one of the real key big ones is keeping top management informed on the status of your, in this case it says EMS, but you may have other ISO standards as well. You may have a quality, you may have a safety management system as well. The other thing is it also helps you to identify weaknesses or even just non-conformances, as you can see the term areas of concern, which are the weaknesses, and also opportunities for improvement. Now this is really a key area because new to the 2015 version of the ISO standards is a whole section just on continual improvement, that your system has built into it a way of continued moving forward and growth. Finally, it's also an opportunity for recording the findings. It documents where you're at. It also documents for areas that you have discovered, possible leading to nonconformances and or just areas of concern where you feel like you want to head off of the future nonconformance that may be brewing in your organization. It's also a good opportunity, what I call attaboys in audits. Your business units need to know they're doing a good job. They need to hear that. They need to identify what is working and working well, and maybe how they can adapt that practice into other areas of the ISO system that they're employing. Any other questions? Next. Elizabeth? Thank you. Most of what you see here before you is usually what we've taken from our internal auditors, but we apply the same standard to our registrars who certify us and do surveillance audits on an annual basis to maintain our registration to the standard. So mostly for every auditor that we look for, or as we train them here in WThe, we want them to be very focused. Be focused on the evidence at hand. You will find that registrars in particular are extremely good at this. They are very good at cutting off the stories by employees or telling them, you know, we've always done it this way. They're very good at redirecting the audit so that they're looking at the objective evidence before them. The other thing is, believe it or not, your external auditors, registrars, as well as an internal audit, they're going to be using the checklist. And most of their checklists are geared to the standards. So sometimes they may ask a question that doesn't relate well to who they're interviewing because it's the language from the standard, and they'll recognize that. You want to make sure that your registrar, or even internally when you develop your own checklists, that you're using a language that our employee and staff understand, but still communicates the standard. A good example would be environmental aspects and impacts. I can guarantee you, I know here in WThe, a lot of our frontline employees don't relate to those terms, but when we ask them, how does their job, what are you doing on your job that helps protect the environment, I get a much better response. So a lot of times, you might want to, when using checklists, try and use verbiage that relates to the staff. Probing intentional problems. These are usually what your auditor, especially registrars, will refer to as audit trails. A lot of times, what they will do is they may be in a department and the department may feel like the auditor wasn't interested in me, and that's because they couldn't find an audit trail. But when they're in an area and they begin to see some things that look like a systemic problem or just a non-conformance to the standard, they will begin that processing of digging through it. Now keep in mind about not solving them. I will promise you, your registrar is not allowed to help you solve your problem, because that is a conflict of interest with the registrar whom they are employed by, especially if they're a contractor to the registrar. Sometimes you can get them to speak off the record, but for the most part, when they see potential problems, they're documenting the evidence. A lot of times, when gathering any evidence, please take capricious notes. But I'm a huge advocate of pictures. We allow our registrars to take pictures in the field, as we have nothing to hide. We're a public entity, so there's nothing really special here. But it helps them when they get back to their computers or to convert notes. You know, as we like to say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and they go a long way to documenting the audit. Okay, and when you find problems, like it says up here, please discuss them with the local supervisor or manager who owns the process where you've identified something. Converse. Talk about it. Have them go back, so you confer with each other about the finding, and if there's a team, express that and always work with your team. This last bullet is very important. Be polite. Believe it or not, here at WThe, we have had the very unfortunate practice. We did dismiss an auditor from a certification audit, as they were just being a little too intrusive and demanding upon the workforce. They really weren't being helpful. They weren't adding value to the audit, but being more of an agitator. You are in control of your audits at all times. Remember, especially in a registrar, you're paying them. They work for you. This should be not an adversarial relationship, but be one that is cohesive and works together. Because what you're trying to do is find areas in your system where you're trying to improve it, trying to shore it up, as well as making notes of where successes have occurred. So always remember, you're in control, and auditors do need to be professional, both internally in your own system, as well as those you contract to provide certification services. Any questions?
I have a comment, Dan. This is Kerin Lester. So one of the things that I want to add here, I've also fired an auditor, which really felt good because other people told me they thought he was abusive to me personally, which kind of shocked me. But one of the other things that you can do especially with registrars and auditors, you can interview them. You can see if they actually fit with the way that you conduct business. And you get a really good feel. Before I actually went with my registrar, I interviewed about 4 different registrars to decide whether or not I wanted to use a certain registrar. And I looked for things such as, what's your transit experience? Do you have auditors that have visited any kind of transportation industries? Things like that. So just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you, Kerin. Next.
Just before we go to the next slide, this is Elizabeth from APTA. For anyone that's joining late, I just want to let you know that all the phone lines are open. Just please self-mute yourself, but if you do have questions or comments, please feel free to jump in throughout the entire webinar. Thank you.
An audit program. Audit programs are really a cornerstone on how you monitor and measure. It's the final step, and the information that you gather, the review, is all shared with upper management. So as you can see, the 4 core elements from the ISO standard, And you can see that a lot of times you will find when people are writing, a lot of people will have a little mental block here between purpose and scope. The purpose is always the whys of and why we're implementing and how we're conforming in reference to the standard. Where the scope is the boundary, it's your fence line. This is it entirely company-wide? You may be doing it just for one of your modes or one even specific facility that is, that is your test ground for implementing an ISO standard. And also associated with that is you have the activities that you have to identify to impact the environment as well as the goals of the company. So all that makes up your scope. As for responsibilities, here at WThe, we found it very important. We have one person. We put it in we maintained a procedure, and we do it by job title. And that way, that person's job is to coordinate and facilitate. They're not the 100% doer. And as part of also responsibilities, we identify auditors, the conduct of auditors. And also, we're trying to prevent any conflicts of interest. And we describe that in there so that we don't let, especially internally, we don't let auditors audit areas that they are from. They have to be an external to that department or business unit in WThe before we allow them to be an internal auditor. As well as with your registrar that you go ahead and try to create a contract with, they will have a conflict of interest statement signed and reviewed. It will be part of the package because it is one of the ISO audit standard requirements. Finally, in the procedure itself, planning and frequency, especially in your internal audit, you may feel that it is not necessary to annually go everywhere in the organization. You may say over a 2-year period, we will cover all the areas within the organization that fall within the fence line. As I mentioned earlier about auditor requirements, are you going to limit them? Do they have to have special training, or are you going to internal train? But you want to outline that. Your registrar will look at that. As do registrars, they too have requirements. The preparation for the audit, this is key. What are you going to be reviewing? You should be looking at the impacts and aspects, environmental impacts aspects with each department or area within the organization that you're going to audit. Your checklist should be prepared and ready to go. You should have identified an audit team, and possibly within a team, you'll have a lead and help them coordinate with that department or business unit within your organization. Finally, there's the absolute conducting of the audit and the final audit records that have to be preserved, as well as a summary that you give management review. As we talked about earlier, this is kind of critical because management wants to know, that they have confidence in the system that they've implemented, and there's essentially a return on their investment. That is not a bad thing to say. Certification is costly, and you really need to pay strict adherence to it. One thing I do want to mention under this internal audit program, though, that does get a little bit of a conflict is when you're especially in the environmental arena, you are not conducting a compliance audit. You're conducting a system audit, okay? Compliance issues, if you find them during your audit, that is part of the evidence that you are gathering, okay? What you're looking for, though, is systemic. If it is a one-time event, then sure, it's brought to the attention of the organization and efforts to make corrections should be made. But when we're really doing an ISO audit, this goes for your registrar. They will make this clear to you as well as you do it internally. You're looking for systemic, therefore repeated non-compliance in an area. Therefore, you want to look at the training possibly. You may look at how we document in the field. Are there posters or job aids helping workers to properly store or whatever the compliance finding was. So you're looking at the system. This is very important. I'll give you a case in point here at WThe. We changed registrars 5 years ago, and they thought they had a showstopper here in WThe because they came across our light rail vehicle maintenance area and found excessive use of brake cleaner. And they thought that we were in violation of the VOC emissions for the state of Utah. And the lead auditor pulled me aside and he says, I think we're going to have to bring the EMS audit to a stop. And he and I had a lengthy conversation, and we got back to this very thing about compliance versus a system audit. And he continued to go on. And in fact, later on in our research, we were able to demonstrate we were not in compliance with the Utah Administrative Code, but also that the system itself was still robust enough that they found it to be compliant. And so, like I say, is don't turn your, especially for environmental, into a compliance audit. You're looking for just compliance. That's the evidence to look at the system to see if there are breakdowns. Any questions? Okay, next. All right, there we go. ISO certification options. What's out there? Where can you get started? As you can see, some of the options there. An accredited certification. This is a registrar who is certified by ANIB or ANSI to standards, and they go out and obviously perform at great cost certification audits and issue a statement of compliance. Remember, I think a lot of registrars will make it very clear they are not certifying you. They're issuing a statement of compliance with the standard. They don't like to say that, although they'll give you a certificate in many cases. The second option is an unaccredited certification. And if in your area or across this nation, there are a lot of small business auditors who run small businesses, and they're subcontractors to registrars. And you can identify them and have them come in, and they'll do, essentially, it's not a certification audit, but they will do an audit of your system, and if you put it into your bid, ask for a statement of compliance to the standard. Now, this doesn't give you a certificate, but it does carry credence because the auditor you have hired is to the standard that you want audited, is certified to do that standard. So it will carry some weight at a much less cost. Another one is peer review, which we at WThe are kicking around. What we hope here is to find other companies as well as transit agencies who have been certified to do a peer review in terms of sharing internal auditors, so we can learn best management practices. And also because they are either currently certified or have been, again, it carries a little more weight, but a little less so. Next step is self-certification. This you can find on the internet, which can be adopted, but it's a declaration to the full standard, not to just certain clauses. And finally, where it says no certifications, some companies, when they read through the ISO standard, they may only find certain clauses to adopt. So it carries about the least public recognition. Next. Accredited ISO certification. Okay. Usually in an accredited ISO certification, this is a 3-year cycle. There's an initial certification followed by 2 years of surveillance. Or it can be recertification if you continue to re-up. This is probably carries the most weight because they're accredited either by ANIB or ANSI or both for the standard that you are pursuing. The cost that you see before you, a certificate, can range as low as $12,500 to $15,000. That's for quality and environmental. The new safety standard that was issued last year by the International Organization of Standards, 45,001, is going to run about 22 to 25,000 this year for us. Which the 18,001, the old OHSAS standard, expires in March of 2020. So you can no longer be certified to that standard. As you can see, a surveillance cost is significantly less, as well as auditor expenses, because you'll have few. So auditor expenses are per auditor. Depending on the size of your organization, you may have 1, 2, as many as 3. We've had as many as a team of 6 auditors come here. That was because a registrar was new to UTA. They weren't here for the full 2 weeks, all 6. Some came and went, but it was on average in that realm, $2,500 to about $3,000 per week for each auditor. That's their travel expenses. So if you're to do the full certification and you're budgeting over the next 3 years, you would look somewhere in the realm of about $40,000 to $45,000 per standard. Probably, if you're going to pursue ISO 45001, because it's new, auditors' time is at a real premium right now. So because they're just now getting certified and developing that pool of auditors that are out there. So it will cost a little bit more if you pursue ISO 45001. Any questions? Next. I call this unaccredited ISO certification because you're not using a registrar, but you're going to use a certified ISO auditor. We know of a few that helped us actually to write our safety management system before FTA adopted SMS. So we adopted the OHSAS 18001 standard, and he came in and helped us to do it and charged us about $3,000, but that was back in 2013. Spent some time. And he issues his statements of review and compliance. And in his case, he was issuing a statement to us that we were ready for a registrar. And that's really what you're getting from them. So in a lot of ways, it's nice to be as a registrar. It gives a lot more weight than not having a third-party auditor who is certified, but it doesn't carry the full weight of the registrar. Next. Peer review. Again, as I mentioned earlier, is the use of other translation agencies or organizations that subscribe to the ISO standards. Another good way to also, you may have criteria if you're interested or whatever, you may want that the organization or participating agencies actually were registered at one time or another to a standard to which you subscribe. Costs here are limited to participation. You would probably, as a participant, take some of your staff that you use within your organization who have been trained to be internal auditors to meet the standard requirement that you're subscribing to. You may have them travel expenses, and they could spend maybe a week at most at a location participating in their internal audit, or it may be a more formalized, even just peer review audit, just in general, that they are the auditing team. I would recommend more of participating in an internal audit as the internal auditors of the organization that's hosting can facilitate and help them move around in the organization, help them identify areas and people to interview. Kind of expedites it. But as I said earlier, we talked about what it takes to be an auditor. You don't want to be steered away from problems. You're there to help. It has to be value added. You want to be able to identify if there are issues, also recognize where there are successes. And there's a great opportunity to share best management practices. Your team, if it's a visiting team, may see or a best management practice that they would like to take back to their organization and employ, or to convince their organization to adopt. And vice versa. They may have something that they would offer the organization that they're participating with on how they approach areas in the ISO standard that's being audited. Again, as I said, I believe it would give more credibility than it's just a simple self-declaration, because you have a participating organization who has been ISO certified before, or as minimum subscribes to the standard. Next. Self-ISO certification, quite a few organizations will do this, where they will implement and they'll make a statement, a declaration rather, to conformance to the ISO standard that they have implemented. There is a risk associated with this because any external audit, whether it be regulatory or whether it be a result of maybe not a peer but another organization wanting to do business with your organization, wants to audit certain practices, and if they find deficiencies, there pose a lot of risk as to your credibility in the implementation of that standard. So again, as it says, external parties probably pays, there is less value on it, but the fact that you are taking the effort, you're adopting the standard, helps to still give confidence to those who you do business with, that you're employing the clauses of the standard. Next. No certification. As you can well imagine, this carries the least of any value or recognition to public or external interested parties of your organization. Many cases, the complete adoption or implementation of the full standard does not take place because the organization has only chosen to implement those clauses that they feel will aid them in reducing risk in their organization. Next. So in summary, moving forward, as you can see, I really recommend that, especially if you're starting out in ISO, to really, I think for any organization, gaining self-confidence and really helping to improve as well as strengthen, and even moving forward, is recommend at least one cycle of being certified or receiving a certificate of compliance from a registrar. And again, you could there's the reiteration of the points, especially number one now, top management engagement. That was a new addition and focal point of the 2015 versions of the Quality Environmental Standards, where there's a whole clause just dedicated to leadership of the organization, as well as the context of the organization. Strength of employee involvement. I promise you, anybody implementing ISO, it is a real recognized, it has to have strength at the top, but you must engage all the way down to the shop floor, the frontline employee. That's where the real strength is. That's where the recommendations of improvement, new ideas, best practices, they really originate from that group. They'll bring them and then they get further developed throughout the organization. Clean and well organized facilities, as well as you get interested parties buy-in on your performance. So it's really something I'm a huge advocate for. Again, like I said, on accredited certification, using a third-party auditor that's certified, you're just in for the cost. Depending on how far they travel, you can see approximately $4,000 there. We have a certified auditor here in Utah, so he's local to us. Our worst cost for travel for him is issuing him a free pass on WThe for a week or two. So, again, he helped us develop our SMS in preparation for that and carrying that certification. Peer review, again, also public value goes down a little bit. But the nice part is, I think there is the cross-pollination across the industry and other best management practices from organizations that subscribe to the ISO standards. As I pointed out earlier, Self-certification carries a high risk, especially if conformance to the standard is not met and gets identified, especially by a third party that's interested in your organization. And finally, the no certification, which is really probably not an adoption of the full standard, but those clauses to help you reduce risk within the organization. Again, at that point, you're adopting clauses specifically only to your industry, hopefully improving your performance. But as for recognition outside the organization, probably has no value, probably no recognition by third-party interested parties. I want to thank everybody for your time and your ear. Hopefully I have not been too long-winded for you. If you have any questions, please speak up, or for that matter, please email me. And for those who might be interested, at WThe, we're going to be taking a long look in 2020 at the peer review process and reaching out to organizations as well as transit agencies that may hold some interest. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Dan. We really appreciate that. And a lot of different options for pursuing an EMS program at your transit agency. There's a lot of good little nuggets in some of the things that Dan talked about. If anybody does have any questions, we'll be able to take some more at the end. But right now, we're going to hear from Amy Shatzkin, and she has a few parting words for us. We can go to the next slide and hear from Amy.
Thanks, Kerin. Hi, I'm Amy Shatzkin. I'm Deputy Director for Sustainability at Sound Transit, and I have with me Bria Knowles, who's our Project Director in Environmental Affairs and Sustainability, and Jamie Brinkley, who is our Sustainability Planner. And we all work on the ESM. In our case, it's not an environmental management system, it's an environmental and sustainability management system. And I'm just going to talk really briefly. I'm just probably going to go through the first slide and maybe skip over the last two in the interest of time, in case there are folks who want to ask questions and have some discussion. I'll have Jamie at the end of my talk maybe address some of the costs, but we've seen costs that are not quite as high as what Dan has for his certification. For the last couple of years, we've averaged around $15,000 for both our internal auditor and the registrar as well. For us, we find that having an ISO certification really helps drive accountability, and it helps ensure our system upkeep because it really pushes internal discipline around our regulatory environmental compliance, as well as our voluntary sustainability efforts, since we use our management system to control both the regulatory and voluntary side. It really helps formalize roles and responsibilities. And the second slide that I have just sort of shows what our sponsorship model is and what the different roles and responsibilities are throughout the leadership of our organization and how that cascades down in the ESMS. So it really helps engage our leadership and helps make sure that we're making decisions at the right level in our organization. And so we've been able to engage leadership effectively and avoid bottlenecks around compliance and sustainability issues. We've also found that the ISO certification, as well as our work on the APTA sustainability commitment and the management system as a whole, really gives our staff building blocks to lead and make change. The system sort of provides an internal authority for staff to make improvements. And because we have this very prescriptive roles and responsibilities that's codified in our procedures, staff are empowered to implement the changes needed for continual improvement. One thing that is sort of, I think, is not often said, but is really important to us is we can talk about things that need to change to leadership, but sometimes it really makes a difference to have an auditor make those statements. And so it really matters sometimes who the messenger is, depending on the audience. And so, that's one of the powers of directing the auditor to sort of look at certain areas where we want to be making improvements, and reporting back to leadership, because it really underscores areas where we want to make a continual improvement. One thing that's also really important is that having an ISO certified system sort of protects the system, if you will. So through leadership changes, having a certified ISO system really ensures that we're going to be paying attention as an agency to the regulatory issues, as well as our voluntary sustainability commitments. And then I'll just end by saying, another thing that we found is that once we became certified, our leadership was really proud of that accomplishment, and they didn't want to lose that certification. And so it was sort of an unintended consequence of becoming certified, but because it's something that they've really publicized and talk about, and not to mention the fact that FTA has really emphasized, implementing management systems and safety, as well as asset management. There, as Dan said, there is sort of a nice overlap between having managed, a series of coordinated management systems. So I'm just going to end there. Do either of you guys want to add anything?
I am pro certification all the way. I guess I would just say that Amy did a great job of summarizing why, but management systems are a lot of work to set up, and they're very helpful. A lot of that work is extremely beneficial. You learn a lot. It brings lots of unity in the organization and does drive continual improvement. But certification helps make sure that the initial commitment is maintained, and that you keep doing it and continually prompts you in a system that's now like 13 or 14 years old. There's definitely been wax and wane in focus and ability and staffing in the program, and the certification drives it and pushes it over time.
So that's our 2 cents from the Northwest.
Thank you very much.
Kerin.
All right. Thank you very much, ladies. I have additional comments from the east, I'm on the east side of the continent here. But my experience with being ISO certified was, you do have the kudos from your board of directors and what we call the C-suite. They're happy to know that you're certified. But I recently had an experience at one of our heavy rail facilities where I went in to do a internal audit of EMS just to get a benchmark, because they will be going up against the ISO certification next month, and running into some of the employees, and they were asking me what we were doing, and I told them, you're about to get audited by the external registrar for your ISO 14001. And the first thing they said to me was, does that mean that we're going to get to raise a flag and have banners around our facility? And they were very excited about being able to show off what the good work that they're trying to accomplish through the EMS program. And that just sort of made it all really worthwhile for me to, because it is a lot of work, but once you get going, you realize it's not you that's doing the work, it's the people that are in your facilities. And that's kind of the mindset that you end up having. And I always tell people I'm really just a big cheerleader for EMS, actually, when it gets down to it, after you get through maybe your first couple of rounds of having the external registrar come. So does anyone have any additional questions they'd like to ask any of the participants? There's 24 people online, and I've heard maybe 6 people say something.
So Kerin, this is Elizabeth. We did get a question through the question box. If you don't mind if I just read it aloud.
Go right ahead.
Okay, this is from Carrie Solomon. Now that the requirement has shifted focus more towards performance management components, how can teams better prepare systemic internal audits that provide feedback beyond corrective action or opportunity for improvement? What's a better method to evolve towards a systematic continual improvements throughout the EMS?
Dan, you want to weigh in?
I'll try and give it a shot here. Yes, the 2015 version is a process-driven as opposed to a documented ISO system. However, it's kind of like what we said in UTA is we didn't have a bonfire and go out and burn all our procedures or manuals. We preserved them because we found them effective. So your process can be written. It can be a flow diagram. When they talk about that, at least the discussions I've had with our registrar, the process still has to be documented in some fashion. It cannot just be Homeric. You still have to have the documented training, inspections, or any other requirements that show that the process is being followed and fulfilled. So it's a matter of how you choose to do it. Some organizations like UTA, we tend to preserve a lot of our procedures, written procedures, as part of that process, where in some cases we actually have flow diagrams that map out the process so that third parties as well as internally, it's a nice way to pass on institutional knowledge. I hope that kind of addresses
Bria. Oh, this is Bria from Sound Transit in Seattle. I can just weigh in a little bit. I think I understood the question. I kind of missed the first clause of the question, but if I understand the intent of it, of just how to audit over time under the directive of the new standard, I mean, we've basically been trying to do that. I mean, you do sort of have to get creative. Again, I've said we had this for 14 years, that we try and audit in different ways or follow different threads. So like a couple of years ago, we did a sort of lower focus aspect thread follow through. So we always have the heavy hitter, significant environmental aspects that are our big concerns as an agency, but we did some of the slightly lower risk ones that were still significant and followed through their processes and procedures to see how well those are being implemented, which is just, it did illuminate some things that, you know, that we hadn't necessarily thought about. And then in another previous year, we also followed like a specific project all the way from inception all the way through to its construction, which is, you know, in a little bit the phase we're in since we're have a lot of capital projects in our agency. But I mean, the core intent, I think, of the move to more performance-based is just as your system matures, trying to sort of deeply address, is what we're doing working? Like, you're fundamentally trying, you want your audits to be crafted in a way that are looking for, is what we're doing actually driving improvement over time? And so it's daunting to think about that outside the structure of the standard and the management system that seeks, you know, to find corrective actions, but it does sort of allow you also to think on a, you know, bigger picture of how all these pieces play together. And so it's, I mean, I'd say if you're early stages of just getting them in place, I would just focus on what the standard asks for and look to meet those. And that where the performance-based really starts to help you sort of verify the system is as the system matures and you're facing like, is this still doing what it was intended when it was set up?
Hello, everyone. This is Clary Coutu from the Northeast, and I'm sorry I kind of jumped in late, but I heard the later part of the presentation, and it's a great topic. I just wanted to add what Amy just said. The continual improvement program we utilize for our certified facilities. We currently have a third-party certification under ISO 14001:2015. This is our 5th year, and we just had our audit 2 weeks ago. Our external auditor pointed to us something that's really interesting for us, because this is, as we mature into the process, it's important for us to track progress and quantify that progress, which, you know, in earlier years, we were managing it through the continual improvement program. But this year, what we're going to do moving forward is actually be able to quantify the improvement over time, either by a metric that we're still defining. But what that does is actually give us a little bit more leverage when we're talking during our management reviews with our senior team, because quantifying improvement can be tricky, but at times when we present it through the continual improvement program and the different actions you've taken over the course of a few years in advance, or advancing your ISO facilities, continual improvement program, it really showcases how your environmental management system is progressing over time. So this particular external auditor brought that to our attention, and it's a great way of us being able to now next year be able to quantify all the actions and improvement actions that we currently have not been able to quantify from the moment we enabled those action items or corrective actions into completion. So over time, we would be able to quantify that as a metric. And I think that was one of the benefits of having an external auditor come in and give you their feedback on how to evolve your system over time as it matures. Corrective actions are one thing, but coming up with actions on a yearly basis to improve what you've done the previous year can be kind of complicated, because you kind of run out of ideas, for recycling or for waste handling, waste management. So you always have to get creative in how you're quantifying your performance to continually improve. So I thought it was really interesting that our external auditor was able to pin down a method for us to do that. So I just wanted to share that with everyone.
This is Kerin from Atlanta. That is a great comment, because my auditors are always asking, okay, what are you going to do? What are you going to be working on next? What are you looking at? And continual improvement, it gets to be kind of challenging after a while. I think some of us are fortunate that we're going to different types of modes of transportation. We don't do light rail yet in Atlanta, but we're going to start working on that. Now we're going to get a whole bunch of different kind of buses in, so a lot of maintenance things will change. So that's, some of the issues that we'll be able to address. But we've been quantifying our corrective action metrics and for the past year, actually, and now starting to really trend that and see if our processes we put in place are actually helping us, or are we just staying the same and we need to, step back and regroup and try something different. So very good. Any other comments from people? Okay, I'll take that as a no. We're tired. Let me just say that if you have suggestions for the next webinar, please go ahead. You can post through APTA Connect. You can send me an email at klester@itsmarta.com. You can, we're all available through APTA Connect. And also, we'll need some participants for the next one. And we are going to I think we're looking at doing 4 webinars a year next year. So we'll have a couple of months. In the meantime,
and
we
Kerin,
might have some, yeah, go ahead.
We did get one suggestion through the chat box if you want to hear it now.
Go ahead.
The suggestion for the next webinar was from Kate Alitsky, who's in New York, and she says, we have a 20-year-old certified EMS for the capital program. We are attempting to expand to operating agencies. What are the metrics that are being used in the operating EMS programs?
Okay.
And I also got a note that someone's having trouble downloading the handout. So if that is a problem for everyone, just know that I'll be sure to share it. APTA Connect, email, make sure everyone gets it. Okay.
And there was one other comment I was going to make that has slipped my mind. So we will need volunteers. Yeah, go ahead.
I also want to mention to EMS working group members that we are putting together a survey for the working group. And this will be coming in the next couple weeks. We really encourage you to fill it out. We really just want to understand your EMS programs better and to better serve your needs and provide more resources to whether that's targeted meetings or targeted conference calls. In addition to the quarterly webinars, we will see based on your results. So please fill out the survey when it comes your way.
And one other just brief comment on the APTA Connect, we do have a filing structure. You have to go down a couple of folders, but you'll see all of the elements of the ISO 2015 document, where if you have forms or you have, policies or procedures that you'd like to share with people that you're allowed to share, please go ahead and start uploading. And that way, some people have asked for, how do you do your aspect impact rankings? How do you do risk assessments? So there's a lot of people that could use a lot of help from people that have a lot of experience. So, and thank everyone for joining. I hope that you found this valuable. Dan, can't thank you enough for volunteering. And thank you, ladies from Sound Transit and everyone else that asked questions, offered comments. We really do appreciate your enthusiasm and just this EMS working group as a whole. And with that, I guess I will say goodbye.
Thank you, Kerin. Thank you, everyone else. Take care.